My son called me at 11:30 on a Tuesday night in February, and the first thing he said was, "Dad, don't turn on any lights, don't open the door, and whatever you do, don't tell Rupert." I was already in bed. I'd been asleep maybe an hour, and when I saw his name on the screen, I figured something had happened at work. My son is a fraud investigator with the RCMP. He works out of the Ottawa office. He calls me sometimes after a bad shift just to talk, but not at 11:30 and not like this. "You're scaring me," I said. "I know, I'm sorry. Just listen." I sat up in the dark. Outside, the street was quiet. The kind of quiet you only get in February in Sudbury, when the snow swallows every sound and the whole world seems to be holding its breath. He told me to listen, so I did. What he said next rearranged everything I thought I knew about my own life. I should back up. My name is Edmund. I'm 68 years old. I spent 34 years as a licensed electrician, most of it with the same contractor in Sudbury. I'm not a wealthy man. I never was. But when I retired 5 years ago, I owned my house outright, had a decent pension from the union, and a savings account that had taken me the better part of 2 decades to build. $312,000. I know the number exactly because I checked it every month. My wife, Lorraine, used to tease me about it. Said I treated that account like a third child. Lorraine passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 17 months from diagnosis to the end. After she died, the house felt wrong. Too quiet. Too many of her things still in the places she'd left them. Her reading glasses on the nightstand. Her garden shoes by the back door. I left them there for almost a year before my daughter Celia finally asked if she could help me sort through things. That's how it started, I think. With Celia coming over more, which was good. At first, she's my youngest. My son Nathan is older by 4 years, and he'd been in Ottawa since his training. It was Celia who lived 40 minutes away in Hanmer, Celia who could stop by on a Saturday, Celia who started calling every few days to check in. I was grateful. I was lonely, and I didn't know how badly until someone started filling that space. Then she met Rupert. She brought him to Thanksgiving that first year. He was charming in the way that people are charming when they're performing it. Big handshake, remembered your name, laughed at everything you said. He sold residential real estate. Did well, by the look of him. Always drove a new truck. I didn't trust him, and I couldn't have told you why. Just something about the way his eyes moved when he thought no one was watching. Taking inventory. They were married the following June. Small ceremony, which I thought was unusual for Celia, who'd always talked about a big wedding. She said they wanted something intimate. Rupert said weddings were a waste of money. I noticed she'd stopped disagreeing with him about things like that. By the second winter, they were having trouble with rent. Their landlord in Hanmer had sold the building. New owner was raising rates. They had 60 days to find somewhere else. Celia called me crying. I said they could stay with me while they sorted things out. Just temporarily. Temporarily lasted 14 months. The first few weeks were fine. Then things started shifting in ways I couldn't quite name at the time. Rupert had opinions about the house. The layout was inefficient, he said. The basement was wasted space. He knew a contractor who could finish it properly, open it up, make it livable. I said I wasn't interested in renovations. He'd nod and change the subject, but he'd bring it up again a week later from a different angle. He started taking my mail in from the box. Said he was doing me a favor, it was on his way. But then I'd have to ask him for it. And sometimes I'd ask and he'd say he'd left it on the counter, but it wouldn't be there. Bank statements, mostly. Once, a letter from my financial advisor that I never saw at all. Celia started making my appointments for me. My GP, my optometrist. She'd come along to translate, she said, in case I didn't catch everything. I'm 68, not deaf. But she'd sit there with her notepad and take over the conversation before I'd finished my first sentence, and the doctors would start directing their answers to her instead of me. I noticed I said something once and she teared up and said she was only trying to help, that I'd been forgetting things lately, hadn't I? Had I? I started second-guessing myself. Maybe I had been more scattered. I was grieving. I was lonely. I was older. Maybe she was right. That's the thing about it. You don't see it while it's happening. You just feel vaguely smaller each week, and you assume that's just aging. Nathan flew home for Christmas that second year, and something changed in his face the minute he walked through the door. He didn't say anything, but I caught him watching Rupert at dinner the way Nathan watches things at work. Patient, still, like he was waiting to see what would happen next. He called me from the airport before his flight back. "Dad," he said, "how much do they help with around the house?" "Quite a bit," I said. "And Celia handles some of your paperwork now? Appointments?" "She does, yes. It's helpful." Silence on his end. "I'm sure it is," he said finally. "I'll call you soon." I didn't hear from him for 3 weeks. When he called again, he asked me very casually if I'd ever considered adding anyone to my bank accounts. For convenience, I said no. He said good. That was 6 months before the February night he called me in the dark. So, 11:30, dark house. Me sitting up in bed with no lights on, and Nathan's voice on the phone telling me not to let Rupert know we were talking. "There's a file on him," Nathan said. "I can't tell you everything, and I want you to understand I'm not calling you officially. This is your son calling you, not the RCMP. "All right. His name isn't Rupert Colton." I didn't say anything. His real name is Stephen Foss. He's had 3 aliases that we know of. He was investigated in Barrie in 2019 for financial exploitation of an elderly couple. He married into that family, too. The woman was widowed, had a son overseas. By the time anyone caught on, there were joint accounts, power of attorney. The house was being refinanced. The room felt very cold, even though the furnace was running. "The charges were stayed," Nathan continued. "Witness issues. He moved, changed his name legally 2 years ago. We didn't connect him to the Barrie case until 3 weeks ago, when a tip came in from somewhere else. Nathan, Dad, your sister. I don't know what Celia knows." That's the honest answer. I don't know if she's in on it, or if she's another person he's using. But I can't ask her right now, because if Rupert finds out we're looking at him, he will move fast. That's what he does. I sat there in the dark and I thought about Lorraine. I thought about how she'd built that savings account with me. 22 years of it. Every time we decided not to take the expensive vacation. Every time we drove the old car one more winter. I thought about her garden shoes still sitting by the back door because I hadn't been able to move them. "What do I do?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning, before he's up, I need you to go to your bank in person. Tell them nothing has changed with your accounts, no authorized users, no new signatories. Ask them to flag any requests for changes and require your in-person presence for anything going forward." "Okay, A. Then call your lawyer." "Do you still use the same one? Don Walsh?" "Yes. Call him. Tell him you want to review your will and your powers of attorney. Don't say why." "And Dad," Nathan paused, "has he ever asked you about the house? The title? The inventory look?" Rupert's eyes at dinner, scanning the room. "No," I said, "but he's mentioned renovations more than once. Finishing the basement. He has a contractor he knows." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Call Don first thing." I lay in the dark for a long time after we hung up. Down the hall, I could hear the furnace clicking. In the guest room, the room that had been Lorraine's sewing room before I gave it over, I could hear nothing. The next morning, I set my alarm for 6:15. I was dressed and out the door before 7. Rupert never came downstairs before 8. The bank manager, a woman named Susan who'd handled our accounts for years, listened to me carefully. She asked a few questions. Her expression didn't change much, but she picked up the phone when I finished and made 2 calls before I left. The account flags were in place by the time I walked out the door. Don Walsh had 40 years of family law behind him, and the kind of unshockable calm that only comes from having heard everything twice. I told him what Nathan had told me. He told me to come in that afternoon. By the time I got home, Celia was in the kitchen making eggs, and Rupert was at the table with his laptop open, coffee at his elbow, like he owned the place, which, it turned out, he was in the process of trying to arrange. Don called me that evening. He'd done some digging. 2 weeks earlier, someone had contacted the Provincial Land Registry requesting information about my property title. The inquiry had come from an email address that traced back to a numbered company registered in Ontario. Don was still untangling the ownership of the company, but the registered director's name was familiar. Stephen Foss. I sat in my workshop after that call. I'd converted the back room into a woodworking space a few years ago. Kept me sane through the worst of the grief. There's something about working with your hands, making one cut at a time, that keeps you from spinning out. I picked up a piece of walnut I'd been shaping into a small bowl. Turned it over. Checked the grain. Some wood has faults you don't see until you're already into it. You think you know what you're working with, and then the saw finds a crack running clean through the middle. The next part happened faster than I expected. Nathan had a colleague in the Ontario Provincial Police Financial Crimes Unit. He made a call. Within 4 days, there were people looking seriously at Stephen Foss, also known as Rupert Colton, also known at least once as Rupert Castine, which was the name he'd used in a similar situation in Sault Ste. Marie in 2016. That one had never made it to charges either. The victims, a couple in their 70s, had simply lost their nerve, I didn't intend to lose mine. 2 weeks after my trip to the bank, I got a call from Nathan at a normal hour. He asked if I had a few minutes, and I said yes. He approached a notary in Sudbury, Nathan said. He had documents. Looked like a power of attorney. Your name on it, his name as attorney. The notary was suspicious of the signature and stalled him. I never signed anything like that. We know. It's a forgery. Good one. But not good enough. Nathan let that sit for a moment. Dad, they're going to bring him in tomorrow. I wanted you to know before it happens. I asked about Celia. They'll interview her. I don't know yet what they'll find. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid. I'd passed afraid 2 weeks ago. What kept me awake was something harder to name. The sound of Celia's voice when she was 9 years old, calling me from the backyard because she'd found a baby bird fallen from a nest. The way she'd cupped it in both hands, so careful. Where does a person go from that to this? And had she really gone there? Or had she been taken? The next evening, I was in the workshop when I heard a car door and then raised voices from the front of the house. I didn't go out. 30 minutes later, the voices stopped. I heard the front door. Then quiet. Then Celia knocked on the workshop door. She came in and sat on the stool in the corner, the one she used to sit on when she was small and watching me work. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. She looked, honestly, like her mother used to look when she was carrying something that had gotten too heavy. They took him, she said. I nodded. Dad. Her voice broke. I didn't know about the forgery. I swear on Mom's name. I believed her. Which was almost worse. What did you know? I asked. She looked at her hands. He said it was all going to be yours anyway, that we were just protecting it, making things easier for you. He said you were getting forgetful and you'd want us to take care of it eventually, so we were just getting ahead of it. She looked up. I wanted to believe that. I know how that sounds. It sounds like you let him tell you what you wanted to hear. She started crying, not the performative kind. The ugly, exhausted kind that you can't fake. I was scared of losing you, she said. After Mom, I thought if I was useful enough, you'd want me around. And then Rupert was there, and he had all these plans, and I let it happen. I let him lead, and I stopped asking questions. I sat with that for a while. The woodworking tools on the walls, the smell of sawdust and linseed oil, the piece of walnut on the bench, still unfinished. Did you ever talk to your brother about any of this? No. Rupert said Nathan was always judging me. I stopped calling him. Of course he did. Go to bed, I said. We'll talk more tomorrow. She stood up, hesitated. Are you going to make me leave? I don't know yet. Go to bed, Celia. The investigation took several months to complete. It turned out Stephen Foss had been running variations of the same scheme for nearly a decade. Elderly widows and widowers, mostly. A pattern of inserting himself through a family member, cultivating trust, then systematically working toward financial and legal control. 6 confirmed victims across Ontario and Alberta. Total losses approaching $2 million. He'd chosen his targets carefully. People who were grieving, people who were a little isolated, people with assets and adult children who were far away or busy or, in Celia's case, willing to be slowly repositioned into a supporting role without quite noticing it was happening. I was almost one of those losses. $312,000 and a house that Lorraine and I had spent 30 years turning into a home. The Crown proceeded with charges: fraud over $5,000, forgery, personation with intent. The preliminary hearing happened on a damp morning in October, and I sat in a courtroom for the first time in my life and watched Stephen Foss, in a suit that was slightly too good for his circumstances, speak quietly to his lawyer. He glanced at me once. I looked back at him, and I didn't look away first. The justice of the peace remanded him into custody pending trial. Bail denied given his history of flight and the use of multiple identities. After the hearing, I walked out into the gray October air and stood on the courthouse steps for a minute. Don was beside me. "That's the beginning," he said. "I know. You did everything right." I nodded. It was true. I had. And I was standing outside a courthouse in the town where I'd lived for 34 working years and raised 2 children, and something that should have felt like victory just felt like exhaustion and sadness pressed together. Don went to get his car. I stood there a little longer. Winning against someone who got in through your daughter isn't winning. It's just damage assessment. Celia had moved out while the investigation was ongoing. She was staying with a friend in Sudbury, working as a receptionist at a physiotherapy clinic, the kind of job she'd had before she met Rupert and started letting him make the decisions. She'd retained her own lawyer. The police had interviewed her 4 times. The Crown determined there was insufficient evidence that she had knowingly participated in the fraud, but the civil side was still complicated. She called me once a month. Short calls. She didn't ask for things. She just talked. Told me how the job was going, asked about my woodworking, asked once if I'd thought about getting a dog. I hadn't, but after she said it, I thought about it. Nathan came home for Christmas. We cooked together in the kitchen the way we used to before Lorraine died, back when she was the one directing traffic, and we were both just trying to not be in her way. It was quieter, but it was good. It was ours. After dinner, we sat in the living room. I'd moved Lorraine's reading glasses finally, put them in the box with her things in the bedroom closet. The nightstand was clear. It had taken me 4 years to do that, and I wasn't sure if it was grief letting go or something else, a decision to stay in the present tense. "You seem better," Nathan said. "Different," I said. "Better is probably right, though. What about Celia?" I was quiet for a moment. She made a choice that opened the door. But he walked through it. I looked at the fire. She's not the same person who opened that door. I can see that. I'm not ready to pretend the year didn't happen, but I don't think she's gone. Nathan nodded. He was better at silence than most people. Always had been. "Maybe next Christmas," he said. "Maybe." We didn't say more about it. We watched the fire. Outside, the snow was doing what Sudbury snow does in late December, which is coming down in a serious, committed way that means it intends to stay. In March, Stephen Foss took a plea. Fraud over $5,000, 1 count of forgery, 1 count of personation. The Crown withdrew the remaining charges in exchange. His sentence was 4 years in a federal institution, minus time served, with 2/3 to be served before parole eligibility. He was also ordered to pay restitution across all 6 victim files, a number his lawyer made clear he'd never realistically clear, but it was on record. It wasn't 15 years. Some of the victims' families were angry about that. I understood the anger. But 4 years was real. 4 years was him sitting somewhere that wasn't my house, not making plans, not driving that truck. Don called with the news while I was in the workshop, sanding the walnut bowl I'd finally returned to. I'd been setting it aside for months. It was time to finish it. "That's it," Don said. "It's done." "Thank you," I said, "for everything." I hung up and stood at the workbench for a while. The bowl was nearly there. Just needed another pass with the fine grit, then the oil finish. Some things you make and they come out wrong and you set them aside and you're not sure if you'll come back to them. Then one day you pick them up again and you see the grain properly and you understand what the piece was trying to be all along. In April, Celia sent me a letter, not a text, an actual letter in an envelope with a stamp. Lorraine's family were letter writers. Celia got that from her mother. She wrote that she was still in therapy, that she'd been reading about coercive control, the patterns, the stages, and that recognizing herself in those descriptions had been one of the harder things she'd ever done. She wrote that she understood if I needed more time. She wrote that she'd been thinking about Lorraine a lot lately, about the kind of mother Lorraine had been, patient and direct in equal measure, and that she wanted to be more like that. Herself, she meant. More like herself. At the bottom she wrote, "I'm trying to be someone you could trust again. I know that takes time. I have time." I read it twice, put it on the shelf in the workshop beside a small clock I'd fixed for a neighbor last winter, the first piece of work I'd done for someone else. Proof, I suppose, that I still had something to offer. I started volunteering at the seniors' center on Tuesday afternoons, woodworking, some basic repairs. There's a woman there, Helen, who runs the program and has no patience for nonsense, and we get along very well. One Tuesday, she asked me how I'd gotten into woodworking in the first place. I told her my father had taught me, that I'd been in his workshop from the time I was about 5, handed him tools he was too kind to say I'd gotten wrong, watched him make things out of nothing. She asked if I'd ever taught anyone. I thought about Celia at 9 years old sitting on that stool. Not properly, I said. You should, she said. I thought about it on the drive home. The snow had finally cleared by then. The mud season was well underway, the particular gray-brown mess that Sudbury produces every spring before the green comes back. Not beautiful, but necessary, a stage things have to pass through. I called Celia that evening. First time I'd called her, instead of waiting for her to call me. She picked up on the second ring. "Hi, Dad," she said, like she'd been expecting it eventually and had learned to be patient. "Are you free on Sunday?" I said. A pause. "Yes. I've been working on a walnut bowl for about 8 months. It's finally ready for the finish. I thought if you wanted, you could come and I could show you the process. It's not complicated, but it takes some time." Silence. Then I heard her breath catch. "I'll be there," she said. I put the phone down and went to the workshop, picked up the bowl, turned it over in my hands. The crack I'd found partway through had been the best thing that could have happened to it. Made me slow down. Made me look at what I actually had instead of what I thought I was working with. Not every broken thing can be fixed. But some things, with enough patience and honesty, come out stronger in the end. I set the bowl on the bench and reached for the oil.